Hello, my name is Stanley Porter, Deloitte's Global Energy, Resources, and Industrial Leader. Welcome to our podcast today, where we'll be focusing on Deloitte's Africa Energy Outlook Report. We hope you enjoy the session. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We have an outstanding report that we've just published and want to chat about why we did it, the impact, some key takeaways. The report does a phenomenal job on the macro aspect of the challenges and opportunities, but also maybe get into a little bit of regional aspects, which I think is the power of the report. But before doing that, let's do some introductions. Stanley Porter, the Global Energy Resources and Industrial Leader for Deloitte, and
Olumide is West Africa Leader, Energy Resources and Industrials.
My name is Luc Kruger. I lead Energy Resources and Industrials for the African firm.
Frederic Correa, Energy Resources and Industrials for Deloitte Angola.
Moussa Ben Youssef, monitor Deloitte, based out of Paris, but mainly working in Africa.
All right. So, first question. Why did we write this report? So who would like to take that first question?
I'll do, Stanley. I think from my perspective, if you look at Africa, there's 54 countries in Africa, and each of them has got different stages and different circumstances. And then on top of that, I think with the whole energy transition, I think it was an opportune time to do the Africa Energy Outlook and start to add to the conversation.
Any other aspects?
If I may, for me, one of the ideas about the report is now those days, a lot of people are talking about energy transition in Africa or globally. However, I think when you look at Africa, you have to look at it a bit differently. And the idea behind it is today in Africa, most of the countries are already struggling to get access to energy. So in addition to that, so we have African countries who are having pressure and as well as they committing in reducing their footprint, even though it's not important, it's around 3%. So given that dynamic, and I think it's quite important to have an overview of Africa, how can we at the same time secure access to energy and as well as reduce our footprint? So that's why we wanted to have a look at it. And as Louis mentioned, it's 54 countries. Each country has different context. So that's why we wanted to take different countries, look at countries, what is the energy mix, what is the current situation, and based on that, see how they can first achieve the objective of access to energy, affordable energy, sustainable energy, and at the same time, make sure that they will reach their target or environmental target. So that's more or less the idea that we're trying to do.
Yeah, I would like to add a point because moreover on that, the baseline of the countries are slightly different. There are countries that have resources in terms of oil. There are other countries that doesn't have access to oil reserves, even though they have good rivers and the potential in hydro. So even if we are in the same continent, the landscape, when we look to each country and the baseline to start preparing an energy transition, and moreover, at least to have a solid and consistent generation matrix, it's slightly different. So I think it's also important to highlight, and during the report we can read it, that the baseline we have among the continent is slightly different. But even though, if we can look in a more helicopter view and we try to scale what could be a combination using infrastructures, potentially we could do properly energy transition in the next coming years.
Yeah, I think the only thing maybe to add is the fact that prior to now, you only get to see fragmented reports, for different countries. I've not seen a comprehensive report like this that seem to combine, for different countries in Africa. I think if Africa must overcome the issue of access and affordability, there must be a joined-up approach amongst the different 54 countries, and that is the whole essence of this report.
So the one thing we've learned globally about the energy transition is absolutely, in Africa, it's going to be region, country specific. In the globe, it's very regional specific. But the challenge is so big. If our numbers are right, 3% of global investment is spent in Africa. Not enough. 25 billion year over year just to get to the 2030 goals. 75%, 800 million people without electricity, 600 million people in the continent of Africa. So this is big. So I want to hear some specifics about maybe the regions in which you represent. But we want to kind of come back then to, it has to be regional. but it's so big. Does it have to be coordination amongst the 54 because it's just so big. But let's get into some of the details specifically. Who would like to start about maybe regional aspects of the report?
For Angola, actually, we have solid reserves in oil, and we are exploiting those reserves and accounting roughly 1.2 million barrels per day in terms of oil production. In terms of when we look to the power generation matrix, we have roughly 25 to 30% pending in hydro, and the combination is to reach at least 50. But the problem is transmission. As I told you, the key point in terms of access to energy is, for example, in Angola and some sub-Saharan countries, is not the capacity to generate, is also the capacity to transmit and to give to distribution phase and to have access in the end of the value chain. So we are struggling in the infrastructure at sub-Saharan region. Even though if we look to the baseline in terms of reserves on oil, gas potential, hydro potential, and solar wind renewables based on wind, we could achieve it. We could achieve it, but we need to improve the infrastructure, at least in transmission, and I would like to have a more solid combination between the sub-Saharan countries and the southern region area. Because if we look to Angola plus Congo plus Namibia, this could be a solid matrix. But of course, it's not so easy to equalize the visions between all the countries.
Yeah, maybe I can go next from a South African perspective, seeing that we're not so far from one another geographically. And this is one of the things of the report that's quite interesting. We've picked 6 countries,
Yes,
not 54. And it's for specific reasons that we picked this from a geographical perspective. And I think there's between these countries a lot of differences, but also a lot of commonality. So from a South African perspective, I think you have access to electricity is actually quite high. It's the highest on the continent, around 89%. But our energy is mostly fossil fuel based, and also coal-fired power station based. So coal-fire based. So there's a realization that there needs to be a transition over time. The question is, will that be? It needs to be a just transition, and that so the timing of this is going to be quite important, and how long it's going to take, and make sure that we mitigate the social impacts around the transition and do it responsibly. And then I think, furthermore, on the South African side, we've got extremely good renewable potential from a solar and wind perspective. I think we've got like the 3rd highest potential globally for solar, and we have been able to implement a lot of renewables in the last 10 years, given the issues that we've had with the current infrastructure. And then similar to Angola, I think that the the transmission capacity is also an issue for us, and we need to invest in that and solve that. And then lastly, that's also very positive. We've had recent gas finds off the west coast of Southern Africa. Yes. And I think if we can develop that might also lessen the dependence of imports into the country. So those are some of the key points for me.
Yeah, infrastructure is a big thing.
Infrastructure is the big thing.
And we have to get to, do you have to leapfrog traditional models, on-grid, off-grid, to get to where we need to be? But for now,
I think let me start with the commonality infrastructure and transmission issues, really. West Africa, 14% in terms of access to clean cooking fuel. I speak to West Africa and Nigeria as well. Nigeria is 17, so not a difference between 14 and 17. And in terms of access to grid electricity, it's 56% across West Africa, and even 55% for Nigeria. So the theme is across the region that there is struggle for access. It's not for lack of resources. There are issues, as mentioned earlier, around transmission, but there are also issues around generation. I think there is an ambition to, by 2030, generate 30% of, Nigerians' electricity through renewable means. And that would help, if you like, work around the transmission issues, because you can have a lot of off-grid and mini-grids. The issue is, access, the issue is affordability. Because, for us, that is part of just transition. It's not just about putting the alternatives on the table. It's about, is it really affordable to the people? Most people still use, biomass for cooking, and it's not for lack of resources in the region. Significant gas finds in West Africa, transformation margin from Cote d'Ivoire down to Nigeria. So it's about how quickly can we monetize these resources, but are they also affordable? Otherwise, what we continue to see is investors only invest in export gas and not domestic gas because of affordability issues.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Olimide, because you touch a really important point regarding the clean cooking part. Because I want to highlight the fact that when we're talking about energy poverty in Africa, we're talking from our point of view, we are highlighting 2 points, which is quite important. The one is access to electricity, as we just discussed, but as well as, which is one of the key elements, it's access to clean cooking. Today, Africa, you have around, I think, 800 million people who doesn't have access to clean cooking. And for a fact that's extremely impacting the education, the health of, I think, 100,000 of people are dying on a yearly basis because of air pollution or indoors air pollution. That's one critical element. The second one that, as we said, it's access to electricity. And for that, as my colleague, I think, mentioned different regions in Africa, and I want to maybe focus on the one on the north. As we said at the beginning, different part of Africa has different challenges, different maturity. So if you look, for example, the north part of Africa, most of the countries has today access to electricity, which is around 98 or even 100% in some of the countries. And the challenge for those countries is it's more about now transitioning from fuel-based energy to a more renewable. And I think if I take the example of Morocco, where today I think around 90% of their electricity generated from fossil fuel, mainly coal and gas, their challenge is, or not the challenge, the focus is to transition to more renewable energies. In addition to that, if you look at the country, they have a high potential in terms of solar energy, wind energy as well. So I think the idea for Morocco, and based on where their position is, to become a new energy hub, so reducing their dependency on all the imported fossil fuels, because they don't have fossil fuels, and focusing now more in producing a green energy like hydrogen with a high potential. There are some projects going on. Mauritania, the same thing. I think Mauritania is quite advanced, because they are launching a green hydrogen project, which then they will transform to ammonia and then they will export. So that's one of the challenges that's coming. But I want to also highlight the fact that in order for some of the countries to achieve the transition, it's not only just going renewable, but they need also to use the fossil fuels. For example, as you can have seen, the gas, the new discoveries, most of them are in Africa. And a gas is a transition energy. And we're talking a lot about access to energy. We're talking about clean cooking, but we would like as well to one step further to industrialize the continent. And if you want to industrialize the continent, you need to rely on your gas. So I think for me, what is important for us to focus is we need to find the right balance, or the intersection point between fossil fuels and renewable, for first securing access to energy, clean cooking, but at the same time industrializing the continent and not only relying on imported products.
And just to finish, and in the continental perspective, we can have, and we have on the report, focus also in Mozambique. And Mozambique, as all you know, the gas potential is huge, and the level of reserves it's very high, and the quality. We have the majors looking there. And it seems that we are going to restart the operations till the end of this year, and of course that it could have a huge impact in terms of gas enabling the development across the continent, starting from Mozambique to the rest.
So the report outlines the one word that captures me is abundance, because abundance of natural gas reserves, abundance of proven oil reserves, the largest wind capacity potential, I believe. And then everybody talks about hydrogen, which I think was it 5,000 million tons, which then gets to the EIA that you have in the report and the United Nations SDG you have in the report. So if you had to make a bet on a path, right, in regards to the transition, do you begin to bet on a renewable source, hydrogen? Do you have to bet on infrastructure before you go there? Like, give me, based off of your specific region, is there a sequence, right? Because capital is limited and you only have 3% coming. And you need $25 billion a year, to get there. If you had to provide kind of a takeaway in regards to sequencing the opportunity, what would that be?
I would say that for sub-Saharan region, the southern region, I would say that I could have a roadmap. So I would go for, I think we should go for the infrastructure, because afterwards try to maximize the exploration on oil that is already ongoing. Having extra resource with gas, because in the past most of those gas was flared and now is reinjected to have more pump in oil, but can be also monetized and we increase gas to power. Even if it is a fossil fuel for generation, it's better than oil. And based on this footprint, starting developing also more the hydro and solar, and coming from a very oil-pending matrix in generation to a more renewable generation, and starting enabling access to the energy through a better transmissions line. I think if we look to this path, it's reachable. It's reachable to make the things happen, to increase the energy capacity, reduce the poverty, and on top of that, starting to looking properly to renewables. But for now, at least at Southern, I would say that this baseline, it could be a good starting point.
Yeah, maybe on South Africa, I think similar to what you are saying, I think we've got some immediate issues that we need to resolve in the rolling blackouts that we have. So I think transmission capacity very important. We already have, I think the current state of what's happening with the coal-fired power stations have accelerated some of the renewables in South Africa, which is a good thing. But I think immediately we need to solve the current electricity crisis.
Yeah.
Make sure maintenance, theft, and all of those sort of things are addressed. And then, look at the longer term. Like I said, I think coal will be in the mix for quite a long time, but it will go down over time. And then I think if we can develop some of the gas fields, I think that'll be quite good for the country as well.
Okay, if I may speak to the West, I think it would have to be a balanced approach. On the one hand, you need the infrastructure fixed, transmission, because you need heavy electricity for industrialization. But at the same time, there is need for, some off-grid access for rural communities, for households. So we can't pursue one to the exclusion of the other. I think we would prefer to have a balanced approach to them, put some real investment in infrastructure, particularly transmission. And I think some are ongoing already with Siemens and all that. But also there is need to not forget the just part of the transition.
Correct.
Yeah. Ensuring we look after those who are still struggling, the 86% who don't have access to clean cooking fuel. So for some of those, households, maybe, the off-grid renewable solutions might work. And quite a bit of donor and supported funds available to jumpstart this process.
Path forward?
Well, Stanley, this is a difficult question to answer. So the reason why I'm saying that it's it depends. You need to look at it as the continent. Each country has different priorities. The way how I look at it, it's first, as I was mentioning, it's quite important to ensure access to a reliable and affordable electricity. In order to achieve that, what we believe is that this is an opportunity for African countries to embrace the renewable energies, because this is the easy solution. As my colleague mentioned, in entire continent there is an infrastructure issues, especially the transmission. Remedy highlighted the fact that the mini-grids or the off-grid solutions, especially in the rural areas, when you don't have access to electricity, the best solution for you is the renewable, is the off-grid, mini-grid solutions. I think that's the first key element. It's not we are going to do renewables because we would like for transition, but as well as it might be a solution for those rural areas which don't have access to the grid. That's one of the elements. The second one, as we mentioned, it's a must to reduce the traditional biomass. As I said, this is a health issue, this is an economic issue, and as well as an education issue. I think one of the bets we should look at, as well as renewables, as other LPG or other solutions in order to find or to reduce the usage of wood, fire, etc. So, and then when we are looking at those couple of things, for me, renewables is a good solution. Then, as I was mentioned earlier, the other bet is the countries who has potential in terms of producing or fossil fuels, they need to industrialize their economy or diversify the economy. You can do it both ways. You can export your resources and then use the money in order to diversify your economy, or use the solutions as Federico mentioned, the gas to power. So that's an element that will help you, gas to power or gas for heavy industries. I think those are key elements. And don't forget as well that Africa, as you mentioned, is abundant at the beginning, but there is a quite important element, which is the raw minerals. Those minerals are also used for the production of the new technologies like storage, batteries, like solar panel, etc. So it means that when we go back to the industrialization, we are talking about manufacturing. So this is a key element that we can export those elements, we can produce them locally. Yeah. And then the third bet, if I may say, is the idea of, you can look at some countries like the North Africans or countries which they can, today hydrogen, it's a long-term bet. Why we're talking about that? So because they have abundance of renewables or renewables energies, they can produce green hydrogen and then export it and become a hub. Mm-hmm. So, and in addition to that, what is quite important is we need in Africa to develop this low carbon manufacturing, because as you all know, we have the CBAM, which is the carbon border, adjustment mechanism. Exactly, which is today or tomorrow, if you wanna export, right, you need to have low carbon products. Yeah. We have all the elements. We have all elements here. So we need to combine both. So in order for Africa to become a hub in terms of green energy, in order to strive, in order to build, to industrialize itself. But as we see, there are some challenges, and infrastructure is a key. And when we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about investment. And we're talking about investment, we're talking about policy. It's all linked. So we need to have, at the same time, different, actions in order to tackle policies, governance, investment, and make sure that we are able to deliver this project. And I will, my last word, I think, because it's quite also important to talking about capabilities, because even in Africa, we are doing a lot of projects, but as you can see, the overrun of the projects and etc. So even the delivery of the projects, that's quite a key element that needs to be highlighted, and we need to improve on those aspects.
To wrap up, I do want to do a speed round on kind of your key takeaway, but can somebody just speak to what we've seen globally is policy matters, be it incentives, be it penalties, but policy matters. And we said this 54 countries. And so if you look at IRA, you look at Fit 55 in Asia, you look at the Green Deal in Europe, it is more of a yes or no. Are you optimistic about the role that within the countries policy has to play to do two things: infuse capital and then ensure that the abundance is not going out versus your just transition? So just real quick, I mean, your gauge on the policy that's required to do this. Do you think the policy will come to support the solutions we've just talked about?
Yes, I think so. And I think a number of the countries are repenning the policies now to adjust and make sure it's fit for purpose.
Good.
Yeah, I think moving in the right direction. I think the important thing is to implement and create certainty. In order, some of these investments are capital investments with very long lifetimes or life cycles. And you need to make sure that there's stability and certainty around people that needs to make those investments. So policy is very important.
Indeed, and you touched in a point that for Angola it's quite interesting because now the oil companies are coming to become energy companies, and I think Angola has the opportunity to adjust the regulation and all the companies that are producing oil to have some incentives if they reinvest part of their profit in oil in renewables. That is being fought, and also the off-grids in order to enhance the access to power in more remote regions are being fought. So I hope that we could progress also on that topic.
Direction. Yeah. Positive?
For me,
Direction,
it's a must. We don't have any
It's a
resource.
must.
So we can do it if without policies. And don't forget, we are competing with the rest of the world. So that's quite important. For international investors, the first thing that they will see when they go to the country is the stability of the country, the governance, the policies.
Yeah.
Confidence.
And as you all know that we are competing with the international also for capital.
Yeah.
Well,
And we are competing with other energies, for other industries for capital. So it's a must. That's not...
all right. So in a word or two, your biggest takeaway.
Yes, for me, there is need for a cohesive and joined-up approach within the African continent, because we can see from the stats, the regions are not far apart from North Africa, both in desperate need for access to cleaner cooking fuel and also access to electricity. So the economy must work together with one voice, both are approaching the global investors, but also the United Nations.
Very good. Key takeaway.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think absolutely required. I think one of the key takeaways for me is that there's so much potential. And given that the expectation around economic growth in Africa as well as population growth in Africa, I think it's critical that we get this right. And as Musa said, make sure that we get industrialized economies and growth and prosperity for the continent.
Good. Well, you calling you, so we'll finish with you. Thoughts? The key takeaway?
So for me, key takeaways is first, improving clean cooking. There is a point that we didn't touch base because we have time, but natural-based solutions, it's quite key. It's quite important for the continent. And third one, the key element is find the right intersection between renewables and fossil energies. In one hand, to ensure access to energy, and in the other hand, to make sure that we industrialize.
For me, is energy transition more than a swap from oil spending to renewables is a proper combination of resources. I think that is the key point. We need to add resources on the generation matrix and try to come from a high carbon perspective to a low carbon perspective based on proper infrastructures and regulation.
So this is very insightful, as is the report. You know, for me, the notion of the opportunity, I think it is inappropriate to say Africa. I think the report allows you to decompose where the opportunity is for a pathway to get there. And the biggest takeaway for me is this notion of a just transition. I think the article focuses in on not just kind of the industrial aspect of it, but along with then can you bring the inbound side of Africa quality of life up in this particular transition versus the last that we've had. So regarding keeping the wealth or increasing the wealth, but balancing imports and exports, balancing kind of bringing the standard of life up through this transition. Can you speak more to like how that can be done?
Well, again, it's about policies we've spoken already about. Governments of different African countries must come up with policies that support and encourage investors to retain part of the investment here and part of the output here in Africa, particularly to support, domestic gas to power generation within the African continent. I think we all have accepted at this point that this is energy transition. It is about an evolution and not a revolution. And so to that extent, we all must work together, within the continent and without, to ensure that Africa is not left behind a second time.
We touched on briefly materials. I mean, the global transition can't happen without battery storage. Can't happen if hydrogen is a thing. It can't happen without electrolyzers. Just what's the role that Africa is going to play in that in regards to its minerals? Are there the policies that we've just talked about for energy? Are these going to have to then roll themselves into the material side of it? Do you see both of these kind of coming at the same time? But the policy alone, since we said is such an important role, kind of what are your thoughts on materials as well as energy for the transition?
These countries are also rich in materials, but the level of maturity on that sector, it's lower, even lower than in energy sector. So I would say that if we look to this as an addition of sources and to do a proper evolution in terms of energy transition, I would say if we start to create conditions on regulation in energy that actually is more mature, we could also do a parallel in materials in order to enhance the economical momentum in Africa. That is really, really important because we are also fighting to get some foreign investment, but we are competing with other countries and other regions. And the combination of sources and the confidence on those sources and the level of exploration, it will be a big part in order to convince and to attract the investors to the continent.
So you spoke to a just transition if you have heavy coal and you have to shut down plants or reconfigure plants or redeploy resources. We haven't talked about workforce. Transitioning the workforce, educating the workforce to be part of the transition. Can you just touch on, what is the role that policy, what is the role that energy companies have to play in actually preparing the workforce to be part of this transition in order to receive the benefits of the transition?
Yeah, I think that there's probably reskilling that needs to happen, and as we see also with automation and all of these sort of things as we progress, I think the other thing that's going to be quite important is not just the reskilling, but you might have communities where the jobs will just disappear, and you need to create perhaps projects and other type of things in the communities to make sure that those communities can continue to make an economic livelihood. So I think it's a complex one to get right.
Any other thoughts?
Yes, if I may, maybe Stanley, and going back to maybe try to answer your three questions, if that's possible, because they are interlinked basically. So to go back to the first point regarding policies, I think for me the policy is quite important, and why I'm saying that, when we're talking about, I take an example, simple example of developing those big projects, as you say in the past. So all the wealth goes away or go out of the continent. So when you're talking about wealth, for me, the way I look at it, it's not only exporting the raw material or the crude. We're also having some people coming from abroad doing their project, international companies, which is normal because I think there is not enough capacity within the continent and capabilities. So that's why a policy has a key role. And I want to highlight the fact of the local content policy, which today, when we are developing those big projects, capital projects, local content has a key role. And what is the idea behind local content is to identify what are the services, goods, and as well as the manpower that can be used to develop that project. And of course, at the beginning, when you start in a new, let's say if I take Namibia, for instance, which is a country that had made recently discoveries, oil and gas discoveries, which doesn't have expertise related to the industry, but the role of those international energy companies is to make sure that they will identify what are the capabilities that they can use today, and as well as put in place a long-term plan in order to develop the required capabilities. When I'm talking about capabilities, I'm talking about workforce, which expertise needs to be in the country, the services and goods, in order to serve this industry in the long term. So I think for me, it's quite important that each country will regulate, the development of this project. I'm not talking only about oil and gas, talking about now hydrogen projects. We're talking about all these renewable projects, which are capital intensive, that we need to make sure that we're using services and goods and the workforce locally. And also, it's not only the responsibility of policies or the policies maker, but as well as you look at the international energy companies. From their point of view, they also have some pressure from their shareholders, which developing projects which are benefiting the community, as you mentioned, Louis. That is quite important, that also when developing those type of projects, they will have in mind this multi-energy, if I may call it, projects. Like, for instance, if you want to develop an oil and gas, you can, at the same time, you need water, you need electricity, you can create a solar farm that will benefit your project, but as well as benefit the local community. So I think it's both responsibilities from the policymakers and as well as from the energy companies. When they will enter a country, they look at it from both sides to make sure that we have enough developing the capabilities within the country and developing as well, and the community will benefit from all the projects.
Okay, I would just want to echo that to speak to the need for quality partnership. And I've used the word quality partnership. That's the sort of partnership where there isn't a trust deficit between the government and the energy companies. We must realize that these energy companies, they're big, they've got capacity, and they've got the finances. Increasingly, all transited from being purely fossil-focused companies to energy companies. And so they also are the leading spenders in the renewable space. So the reskilling will have to happen in partnership with them. There's nothing they're going to do in Africa that they've not done elsewhere in terms of the renewables. They're leading the solar business, they're leading the wind and all that. So the local policymakers would have to work with them to ensure that they can help with the reskilling and the upskilling process within Africa.
We have highlighted a lot of the challenge, but I would like also to highlight some positive things that happen. For example, picking up your example of Namibia, today, the people that are traveling to Namibia to enhance the industry in, for example, working in the super majors energy companies, are people that are already in Africa, which is good. So they are trying to leverage the experience from Mozambique, experience from Angola, from Nigeria, now in Namibia. Of course, that is not contributing directly to the local content in Namibia, but if we have continental perspective, it is already a local content, African local content. I think that is a positive sign if we look back 30 years. Okay, so I think the challenges are huge, but some big steps are also being done, and we have to engage to progress.
The evolution.
The evolution.
The evolution. Okay. We covered infrastructure, workforce. We talked about capital, which we should probably talk more about capital, but we talked about capital. But we haven't talked on technology. And so we've actually had a conversation without talking about Gen AI, and that's a good thing. But with that said, what role, particularly, asset-intensive companies are more around OT, IoT, but just your thoughts. What role does technology play in this topic of transition, in this topic of economic stability? Just your thoughts on technology. We haven't touched on technology.
So we know that Africa is behind, when it comes to energy transition. But we also know that if Africa must leapfrog, you would need to leverage technology, the Internet of Things, the AIs and the rest. So we know that in addition to capacity, capital, the resources, the glue that binds everything together is technology. And again, it speaks to that issue of quality partnership with the energy companies. They got this technology. Sometimes, they are able to bring it in the continent. And I think what needs to happen is there must be that moral burden on all to ensure that this technologies are used in the interests of the people of Africa to lift Africa up, really. So I think there is no dispute as to the importance of technology in energy transition. We've seen advancement and we've seen drastic reduction in the price of voltaic panels and wind power in the last decade alone, some dropping as much as 75%. And it's because of evolving technology. So really, if we're going to speak to the affordability aspects of renewable energy, then the issue of technology comes in. So one is access, the other is affordability. For it to be affordable, even for the African continent to implement, technology will need to bring the cost down.
Yeah, good.
One last thing from me, again, is the fact that re-emphasizing that we're not looking at a cutover from fossil to non-fossil, but rather a transition from high carbon intensity source of energy supplies to low carbon intensity source of energy supplies. And I think we must bear that in mind, the word transition, right? Yes. And for us in Africa, we're adding the word just to it. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us in a great conversation on the Deloitte Africa Energy Outlook. We had a lot of energy around this topic. We do want to note that this will be an evolving document to go along with the evolution of the transition, and really appreciate all the hard work and insight of you and your teams. And we hope you read the report. Thank you.